Let's take our Bibles now and go over to Isaiah chapter number 48 this evening. Isaiah chapter number 48, my voice and throat have been messing with me all week, so I don't have a very strong voice this evening. And I guess you might appreciate that if I go short anyways, or if my voice just decides to cut out after the first point. That's right, Harold has instructions. If I have to stop in the middle, he just picks up right where I leave off on my outline. So, anyways, Isaiah chapter number 48. The last phrase of this chapter, the last verse of this chapter, kind of gives me the main theme of chapter number 48, and it is this idea that there is no peace for the wicked. And I just used that verse recently, but here's one of those sources for that verse, that there is no peace for the wicked. God is going to turn his attention back onto Israel here. Isaiah is going to continue to use the same methodology by referring to them as Jacob first and then Israel, recalling their deception, their rebellion, like Jacob the deceiver, but also including the fact that they were Israel, God's chosen people. And then here in verse number 1, we're also going to see the mention of Judah. Now, when he mentions Judah, he's not going to be talking about the tribe of Judah here. He's not going to be talking about the nation, the southern nation of Judah after Israel split in half. He is going to be talking about the man Judah, one of Joseph's brothers, when he gets to that. Let's read here verses 1 and 2. He says this, "Hear ye this, O house of Jacob, which are called by the name of Israel, and are come forth out of the waters of Judah, which swear by the name of the Lord, and make mention of the God of Israel, but not in truth, nor in righteousness. For they call themselves of the holy city, and stay themselves upon the God of Israel. The Lord of hosts is his name." Here in this beginning section, God is letting Israel know, I can very clearly see and understand what is going on. In other words, I can see through your facade, Israel. And you notice that here in verses 1 and 2, especially in verse 2. It starts in verse number 1 where he says, "Which swear by the name of the Lord, and make mention of the God of Israel, but not in truth nor in righteousness." He says, Israel, I've been watching, and I see that you use my name. I see that you go and you do some of the right things. You keep the traditions, but you're not doing it for real. There's no righteousness involved in your tradition keeping. There's no righteousness involved in your religious observance. You think about that statement for a second. That sounds like an oxymoron. There is no righteousness involved in your religious observance. This is the message that he is trying to get to Israel here. Can we take that same thought and apply it today? Of course we can. We can apply it to the Jews today. Your religious observance and righteousness are not together here. That the righteousness is not what you're doing. You've separated yourself from God's righteousness in the midst of your religious observance. Of course, we can look at quite a host of other cults in religions as well that put on the outward form of godliness, that put on the outward form of religion so that it can be seen, so that everybody can comment on it. They wear the long, flowing, white, spotless robes, and they go through with the gold and the silver, and everything looks beautiful and everything looks formally, but just like the Pharisees, he says, you're like whited sepulchres. You look nice and white and clean and pure on the outside, but on the inside are dead man's bones. There's no life there. There's nothing there. And he says, Israel here, I see through you. And remember, what's going on, just as a review, Isaiah is prophesying by the power of God to the people of Israel that one day that there was going to be a nation called Babylon, which was not a power yet, but one day they were going to become a great power, and they were going to come and destroy southern Israel. This is where Isaiah was largely located and mostly speaking to here. He says that one day they're going to come and they're going to destroy Jerusalem and Judah, and they're going to take you and they're going to scatter you. But then later, there's going to be another gentleman by the name of Cyrus of the Medes and Persians. He's going to come and destroy the Babylonians. We've been talking about that in the previous couple chapters. He's going to come and destroy the Babylonians. I will judge Babylon for you, for what they've done to you, or what they're going to do to you one day. But I want you to understand this, Israel, that I see through you. There's a reason all of these things are going to come to pass one day. It's because of how you're living right now. The rebellion that you're living in right now, and the gross disobedience that you're living in right now. And in large part, because of the idol worship, which is involved in the gross disobedience and in the rebellion. The idol worship which you choose to grasp on to the false gods of the nations around you, this is the reason this judgment is going to come forth. So we go back again. He says, hear ye this, O house of Jacob, again pointing out to the deceivers, which are called by the name of Israel. I like that. The distinction here, they're called by the name of Israel. But what? You're the house of Jacob, but you're called by the name of Israel. You're a bunch of deceivers, you're a bunch of rebellious, stiff-necked people, but you bear the name of Israel. Just like some can carry some sort of a Bible, and they can put the name Christian on their colt, and they can go out and try to proclaim themselves as a Christian while not understanding a whit of what the gospel is, while not trusting or believing in who Jesus Christ is and what he did, where he is, and what he's doing now. And without understanding or believing those things, they want to bear that title, that name of Christian. But here he speaks to Israel and he says, you're really the house of Jacob. You're called by the name of Israel, and you're come forth out of the waters of Judah. I think that's an interesting statement that we don't see elsewhere. But this is also not very complimentary. Coming forth of the waters of the waters of Judah, I mean. God reminds them of their tribal ancestor Judah from back in Genesis 37 and 38. Judah was noted for his cruelty. He was noted for his immorality in Genesis chapter 38. And so the Lord speaks to Israel and he says, you come from your father Judah. Well, that wasn't a very great compliment to them. He says, which swear by the name of the Lord, but not in truth, nor in righteousness. And so God is, in a sense, lifting that veil here and revealing what's underneath, the unpleasant parts that are underneath. He's exposing the sin of his people. They take his name, that identify with the holy city, and in one sense, they believe that because they reside in Jerusalem, of all cities, this is the city that houses the temple of God. This is the city where the Ark of the Covenant is. Therefore, nothing can touch this city. And maybe that concept was also bolstered when Sennacherib and the army of the Assyrians came up and surrounded the city of Jerusalem, but were unable to take it. You see, God still loves us anyways. Despite our rebellion, despite our worship of false gods, God still has to protect his temple. He still has to protect his priests. He still has to protect this city of Jerusalem. So long as we're here, it's like our secret charm. This place which God will never allow to be breached. Of course, we look in history and we see that Jerusalem has been breached over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, no matter who is holding it. Remember a time when Eli's sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they came to the tabernacle, which was in Shiloh, and they took that tabernacle to battle with them to the Philistines. Now, they did not do it because God said to do it. They did not do it because there was a command to do it. They did it because they were not operating under God's commands. They were not living in obedience. They were not listening at all to the word of God. They were not living in obedience in any way, shape, or form. Instead, they were trying to do things their own way. And then when they got scared, when things appeared to be going against them, they thought, I'll bring the Ark of the Covenant out with us, and this rabbit's foot is going to keep me from coming to any harm. Maybe a little bit like wearing the cross around your neck and rubbing it or praying it, or wearing the rosary around your neck and praying certain things over and over. This is going to somehow protect me. Rather than just living in obedience, rather than just trusting God, having some sort of a place. And here they call themselves of the holy city, and it says they stay themselves upon the God of Israel. This idea of staying themselves is the idea of leaning. They say, we're in Jerusalem, we have the temple, we go and we offer our sacrifices. We have the Levites, we have the priests, we have the high priest. We have the God of Israel, and they were leaning upon Him. We are leaning upon the God of Israel. But what God is pointing out is this: you use my name, you're using my places, but if you were to stop and you were to take a moment to look at what you were leaning on, you would discover that I'm not there. Is it because God got up and left? No. It is because they moved away from God. And so he said there in verse number 2, the Lord of hosts is His name. He says back, they stay themselves upon the God of Israel, but not in truth. Not in truth. When it comes to the truth, they did not hold to the truths given to them in the law of Moses and the other words that God had given to them. They did not align themselves with the truth that the prophets were standing up and boldly preaching to them. They refused to align themselves to what was actually the truth, but they wanted to bear the name of Israel. And it says not in righteousness either. Oh, they might have worn the robes. Yes, they might have even brought the sacrifices. But in the midst of bringing the sacrifices, they weren't doing it in the right way or at the right time. And on top of that, they were offering sacrifices to false gods at the same time. They weren't doing it the right way. Even the priests and the Levites and the high priest at times were not even doing it the right way. It was corrupted. So even their righteousnesses were not righteous. And so that's why he says, but not in truth, nor in righteousness. Now, speaking about us as Christians for a second here, I want to be able to bear the name of Christ. Woe unto me if I bear the name of Christ publicly and then go and make myself shipwreck and then tear down the name of Christ. We're going to see in this chapter that God is going to put a certain amount of protection upon Israel, not for their sake, but for His own name's sake. Woe unto me if I go and bear the name of Christ by, knocking on doors or giving out tracts or something like that, or going out over the internet and in some way hurt the cause of Christ. Woe unto the person who wants to call themselves a Christian, who wants to take on that title or that name while refusing to abide in truth. And you can find that all over the place. They want to take the Bible and they want to cherry pick certain scriptures out of it that they will agree with, and then they will call certain parts that they no longer agree with as antiquated, and they'll say that the times have changed, and that if God were to rewrite scriptures, it would say something different for the 21st century. And they want to take the truth and parse it out and say, I'll take this part and I'll leave that part. But they want to be called a pastor or reverend or whatever it is. They want to bear the name Christian. They want to stand up in front of a church, but they won't do it with the truth. They want to bring their own subjective truth to the front. And then they will say wonderful, flowery words trying to smooth over what the Bible calls sin and say, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry about it. We're all sinners. It's okay. It's not really a sin. It's just a choice. It's just a lifestyle. You shouldn't be shamed, because of that. And so even the righteousness isn't righteousness. So the Lord sees the hypocrisy of Judah, the Lord who still is every bit as powerful and has every bit as good a vision as He has always had, sees the hypocrisy in our hearts too. It's easy to talk about some um, unnamed church or preacher or something like that and talk about, what we disagree with. But the fact is, when we are studying the scriptures, we need to be focusing in on ourselves first and foremost here, to be sure that we are not bearing the name of Christ hypocritically. That we want to be called a Christian and we want people to view us in such a way, but we don't want to have what it takes on the inside to back it up. My nephew is almost through with his basic training, and I tell you, there's a part of me that's jealous. Part of me that wishes I had that in my background, that I had done that. But then there's also a part of me that thinks, man, I'm sure glad I don't have to be going through that too at the same time. I couldn't even do it today. I would die of, I don't know, diabetic emergency, or I'd throw my back out, or any number of things, right? I wouldn't make it. They wouldn't even let me in, for starters, probably at this point. I'm too old. But, part of me is jealous, but the other part of me is like, well, what am I really jealous of? Am I jealous of all of the anguish and pain that he had to go through for months? No. Maybe I'm just jealous of the uniform. Maybe I'm just jealous of the respect, that it's going to earn him from other people. Christians can do the same thing. We put on the uniform. And we want that respect, but we don't want what it takes to back it up. We don't want to read our Bibles. We don't want to just discipline ourselves to dig in. Why? Because digging gives me blisters. I don't feel like doing it. I'd rather sit than dig. Well, if you don't dig in, you're not going to find anything. If you don't dig in, you're not going to reap the benefits of absorbing the Word of God, of the Holy Spirit teaching you and working in your heart through it. Oh, we want the glory of maybe being the pastor or the Sunday school teacher or the assistant pastor. We want the glory of being the Christian, but we don't want the work that it takes to back it up. Prayer is hard work, isn't it? To close your eyes and to close your mind off to all of the distractions of the day. The things people have said to you, or the things that you imagine they're saying about you. The things that you've seen or heard recently. The problems that you've got to deal with during that day. And when you close your eyes and you're praying, it's amazing how many things you remember that you've got to do. Right? You with me on this one? You get down there and you're trying to focus, and suddenly everything starts coming to your mind of all the things you forgot to write down, all the things you got to do. It's like, okay, I got to do this. Well, I need to think this through, and now suddenly seems like the perfect time to think this problem through. Like, no, I'm praying. It's like minutes go by of distraction before you recall, oh, that's right, I'm praying. I'm talking to God right now. Prayer is hard work. It's hard to shut the world out, to talk to somebody you can't see or feel, but you know He's there. So he sees hypocrisy here in verses number 1 and 2. Look at verse number 3. It says, I have declared the former things from the beginning, and they went forth out of my mouth, and I showed them, and I did them suddenly, and they came to pass. Because I know that thou art obstinate, and thy neck is an iron sinew, and thy brow brass. I have even from the beginning declared it to thee. Before it came to pass, I showed it thee. Lest thou shouldest say, mine idol hath done them, and my graven image, and my molten image hath commanded them. He says, I declared the former things from the beginning. He says, I did them suddenly, and they came to pass. God's very specifically revealed to Israel some important things that were going to be happening. This is prophecy. Why did he do it? He did it because I knew that thou art obstinate. I did it because I knew that you, if I didn't openly prove to you that I am God, that you would refuse to see it and instead choose to place the glory on your idols for having saved you. Recently, the kids were watching a show while they were eating their sandwiches, and it was about Elijah up on Mount Carmel and the 450 prophets of Baal. And the person who put that together did a really wonderful job of showing the prophets as they were worshiping and dancing and making just a bunch of noise. And it was getting louder and faster and higher in tone, kind of like a Pentecostal music service. How it just gets louder and faster and higher in pitch until people start flailing and rolling and howling and whatever the things that they do once they get their energy up, right? And this is how they were choosing, to try to get Baal to Do something, anything. And of course, Elijah mocks them and makes fun of them, makes fun of Baal. And then Elijah practically makes it impossible for his sacrifice to burn by soaking it with too much water. But God shows everybody, without all of the drama, without all of the extra worship practices, without all the building up of emotion, God just shows them with simple truth and power that He is God. This is what it makes me think of. He says, there's a reason that I have my prophets tell you about things that are going to happen in advance, so that when they happen, that you don't go and give Baal the glory for turning back Sennacherib and the Assyrians. So that when I help you, that when I bring you a harvest, so that when I raise up a man like Cyrus one day, so that you don't go to your false gods and give them the glory for what I have clearly done. I knew you were obstinate. I knew you were going to be practically blind in this. And so I'm trying to spell it out for you. But as the years go by, does Israel remember these things? Or how many times do they attribute the great works and wonders that God has done on the behalf of some false god? We go on to verse number 6. Thou hast heard, see all this, and will not ye declare it? I have showed thee new things from this time, even hidden things, and thou didst not know them. They are created now, and not from the beginning, even before the day when thou heardest them not, lest thou shouldest say, Behold, I knew them. Yea, thou heardest not. Yea, thou knewest not. Yea, from that time that thine ear was not opened, for I knew that thou wouldest deal very treacherously, and was called a transgressor from the womb. What he's saying here, he says, Thou hast heard, see all this, will ye not declare it? It's like the Lord is amazed with them, that they've seen all of His great power and glory, and yet they still turn their heads away from Him and stand there obstinate and rebellious in the face of God. It's like the child who has gone astray, but they come back because they need something. They need some money. And rather than repenting of all the bad decisions, repenting of the unkind things that they've said or the disobediences they've done, they take the $20 and they turn around without a thank you and they continue on their way. No thank you. No, I'm sorry, Mom or Dad. No, I made a bad decision. Would you please forgive me? It's, I need something from you. Oh, here it is. Thanks. Bye. And that's that. But haven't you heard all of the good advice that I've given throughout your whole childhood, throughout your growing up years? Haven't you seen how that your mother and I have lived our life in a certain way and how it has kept us from this kind of trouble that you're in? Haven't you seen how we've tried to stay clean and pure? Sure, we've made mistakes because every parent has. And every child can sit there and hang on to those mistakes and say, see, Mom and Dad aren't perfect. I can't stand them. You see, Mom and Dad, they made mistakes. They lost their temper every now and then. And so this is why I am the way I am. Every child can hold up a mom and dad and say, see. Now, maybe some mom and dads deserve it. I don't know. But every child can do that if they wanted to. And every child can in turn look at their mom and dad and say, they're human just like me. And I can forgive them for their wrongdoing just like they forgive me of my wrongdoing. But I can still love them because they're my parents that God gave to me. God is amazed here that His children, having seen His perfection, having seen His holiness and His purity, but also having seen His protection, His parting of the Red Sea, parting of the Jordan River, miraculously helping and aiding them against their enemies as they took down Jericho and Ai and the confederation of the kings of the south, like we talked about on Sunday morning, and the confederation of the kings of the north after that. And after having seen so many things that God has done for them, Israel still turns a blind eye. That's why God told them to set up landmarks. That way, hundreds of years later, as they're getting ready to cross the Jordan River and a kid says, hey, Dad, what's that pile of rocks over there for? Oh, yeah, let me tell you about that. That was way back when your great-great-grandfather was with the people of Israel as we crossed over the Jordan River and God did something miraculous and He parted it so that we could come across, wow, Dad, that's amazing. Is that God still alive today? Yeah. Yeah, he is. That's the same God that we go and worship? Yes, it is. Wow, he could do that? Yes, he can. And they leave those landmarks for that particular reason, so that they can again tell the children, this is what God has done. But then when they forget to teach their children those things, but they teach them how to make money, they teach them how to, be polite, they teach them how to be strong and how to work, but they don't teach them about God, their children grow up rebellious. The children grow up and they see off over there in a distant land some pretty interesting and colorful worship practices that the other nations use for their false gods. And man, that's neat. I like that. And they get a little too interested in it, and they begin to include that. Maybe it starts with just a little tiny idol they sit on their shelf as a teenager. Well, my friends, they are doing this too, and it starts out as just a tiny little idol they found somewhere. And it grows. And then it becomes a family thing. They teach their children how to worship this false god while keeping up appearances at the temple. And so it continues. The Lord is amazed. Thou hast heard. You've seen all of these things. So how can you not open your mouth and declare it? He said, for I knew thou wouldest deal very treacherously, and was called a transgressor from the womb. Let's stop and think about that statement. That you would be called a transgressor from the womb. Was he speaking here solely of Israel? Maybe in a sense that they had grown up learning rebellion. They had grown up learning the worship of false gods in this generation. But I think ultimately he was speaking of what we speak the same thing when we're giving the gospel to somebody. Like in Romans 5:12, where it says, wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for what? For that all have sinned. And so when we are born with a sin nature, and it passes upon us before we even commit a single sin. Now, it doesn't take us very long to start sinning, does it? It doesn't take us very long to start lying and throwing fits and, kicking and that kind of stuff, screaming, as babies. It doesn't take us long to start sinning. We don't suddenly become a sinner at our very first sin. We are born with a sin nature. And so that eliminates all of us. Even the 1-minute-old baby from being perfect before God, from being righteous before God. He reveals here to them that they were a transgressor from the womb. It wasn't just Israel that was. Our individual acts of sin merely prove that we are transgressors from the womb. Look at verse number 9. It says, for my name's sake will I defer mine anger, and for my praise will I refrain for thee, that I cut thee not off. I want you to remember that verse. I find that verse is fairly important. I highlighted it in my Bible because there is a large group of people out there that believes that the church has completely replaced Israel, and that God will never again turn his attention back to them. We call this replacement theology, that he has completely replaced Israel with the church. That we are the new Israel, and that when the book of Revelation speaks of Israel, it's really speaking of the church, the Christians. I don't believe that at all. In fact, we see what we just read there in verse number 9, for my name's sake will I defer mine anger, and for my praise will I refrain for thee, that I cut thee not off. God is intentionally stating that he will not cut off the people of Israel for his own name's sake. Now, we read elsewhere that he does love them and that he does desire to have that relationship with them. And one day they will turn their hearts back to God again. But let's keep reading. He says, behold, I have refined thee, but not with silver. I have chosen thee in the furnace of affliction. For mine own sake, even for mine own sake, will I do it. For how should my name be polluted? And I will not give my glory unto another. Hearken unto me, O Jacob and Israel, my called. I am he. I am the first. I am also the last. Mine hand also hath laid the foundation of the earth, and my right hand hath spanned the heavens. When I call unto them, they stand up together. We go back. For my name's sake will I defer mine anger, Knowing just how deeply sinful his people are, why in the world would God still choose to show mercy to them? Why would God still show long suffering? We could ask the same question even today, even though the world, the lost Gentiles are not God's people in this sense, but why would he still continue to show mercy to Israel specifically here? And the answer to that question is for my name's sake. Because you go around bearing my name, Jehovah God, even if you don't really mean it, and even if you don't believe the truth about it, and even if there is no righteousness in any of the religious things that you are doing, you still are bearing my name. And for that reason alone, I will continue to show mercy for my name's sake. God gives the mercy to glorify himself, to further his own eternal purpose. Later he says, I have refined thee, but not with silver. I have chosen thee in the furnace of affliction for mine own sake. Even for mine own sake will I do it. Why has a disobedient Israel felt the refining fires from the Lord? Again, it was for the sake and honor of the glory of the Lord. Does it bother you to know that God allows trials and is refining fire in our lives for his own sake? You think about that for a second. That God allows trials in our lives for his own sake. Let's remember this. We are not the center of the universe. It's easy to get that way, to think that way, that everything revolves around us. And of course, young kids, they think that way, that everything revolves around them. If they're hungry, the world should stop and feed them. That if they're bored, the world should stop and entertain them. That if they're hurt, the world should stop and comfort them. And, you have to train children to, as they get a little bit older, to not be so selfish and to understand that things are going to operate around them, that other people are hurting too, and that other people are hungry too, and that other people are bored too. And, to train them not to be so self-centered, but we are not the center of the universe. God is. And so God should get all the glory. God should get all of the praise. The God of all eternity, the God of all creation. He allows things for his glory. He allows things to further his praise. And he can do that because of who he is. He says, I am he. I am the first, I also am the last. A phrase we've seen many times now, even in Isaiah. He's talked about here, my right hand hath spanned the heavens. This idea of stretching out the heavens. Of course, you think about that image of him carrying the stars and the galaxies and everything there in his hands. And as he goes and he stretches them out, you can see them just spin out away from his hands. Uses this imagery on purpose. I stretched out the heavens to give us an idea of the majesty and the glory and the power of God over his creation. Look now at verse number 14. All ye, assemble yourselves and hear. Which among them hath declared these things? The Lord hath loved him. He will do his pleasure on Babylon, and his arm shall be on the Chaldeans. I, even I, have spoken. Yea, I have called him. I have brought him, and he shall make his way prosperous. Come ye near unto me. Hear ye this. I have not spoken in secret from the beginning. From the time that it was, there am I. And now the Lord God in his Spirit hath sent me. Thus saith the Lord, thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, I am the Lord thy God, which teacheth thee to profit, which leadeth thee by the way that thou shouldest go. Oh, that thou hadst hearkened unto my commandments. Then had thy peace been as a river, and thy righteousness as the waves of the sea. Thy seed also had been as the sand, and the offspring of thy bowels like the gravel thereof. His name shall not have been cut off, nor destroyed from before me. Beginning of this section there in verse number 14, he calls them all together to listen. He says, which among them hath declared these things? The Lord hath loved him. He will do his pleasure. He says, who out there, which of your gods, Which of you disobedient, rebellious people have been able to declare the same things I have declared? There are none. But he does say the Lord hath loved him. Though the Lord is God of all glory and power, he is not some egomaniac. He still is motivated by love. Motivated by love for his people, Israel. Now, he is motivated as well by love for his bride, us. And so he continues to let the grace flow like we sang about. And so he continues to show great long-suffering, amen, that he is continuously long-suffering with you and I. Why? Because he does love us. It's the Lord's love for us that makes him want us to obey and praise him. It's our love for our children that causes us to want to teach them to obey. So, well, you just don't like me, Dad. That's why you keep, disciplining me. That's why you keep, you hollering at me when I disobey. No, it's not because I don't like you. It's because I love you that I go through the pain and the anguish of trying to be consistent in my discipline, even though I'm not perfect at that for sure. It is my love for you that even when I don't want to get up off the couch to come and discipline what's going on here or deal with whatever the matter is, that I still do it. Why? It's because of my love. Because I don't want 10 years from now to see the end results of what I did not discipline out of you today. I don't want to be reaping the rewards or the opposite of a reward. I don't want to be reaping that in 10 years when you're lying to teachers or lying to police officers because I didn't deal with your lying today when you lied to me. I don't want to be dealing with assault charges one day when you're a teenager because I didn't deal with you hitting your little brother or sister today. I want to teach you self-control. I want to teach you obedience today because I love you. Even though, man, it sure does take a lot out of you to try to keep up with it all. God loves us in that way. We were designed and we were purposed to obey and to praise our Creator. He could have made us submit to him, but he calls us to submit to him. Just as much as it is the love of the Lord for his people, he will do his pleasure upon Babylon. Babylon, they're going to come and they're going to hurt you one day, Israel. And so I'm going to wreak vengeance upon Babylon one day too. You're not going to be able to do it, Israel. You're not going to be in a position to do it. They will greatly harm you, Israel. And it's going to hurt. Many are going to die. But I will wreak my vengeance upon them one day. Today, a lot of people want to see Hamas revenged. They want to see Israel, just send this great vengeance and revenge upon them. But we also need to remember this. God will bring vengeance upon those who hurt his people. God will bless those that bless Israel, and God will curse those that curse Israel. And it's interesting to me, let me say it's alarming to me, just how many people in the United States hate Jewish people. It's alarming to me that for so many generations, it just kind of went under the radar. And we didn't really seem to notice all of the hate speech and all of the crimes that were done against Jewish people. In fact, they are the number one receiver of hate crimes in America. Jewish people are. But now it's getting even worse. And it always still goes back to my mind, why? Why in the world would somebody in New York City care at all about a Jewish person and hate them because of their being Jewish? Why would anybody care about that? And the only answer I can come up with is because they are God's people. Therefore, the powers of darkness naturally despise them and are going to use anybody that they have any sort of power over, even if they're in Congress. Their powers of darkness are going to use them to hurt God's people. But we have to remember this. No matter how much God's people get hurt now, He will wreak vengeance down upon their enemies. And no matter how much God's church gets injured, they will reap the vengeance of God upon them. Maybe not today or tomorrow. But ultimately we know, we haven't gotten to the end of the chapter yet, and I'll have to wait till next week. But ultimately we know that there is no peace to the wicked. Next week, in the midst of this passage, we're going to take a field trip. Not literally speaking, don't get too excited. If we had a van or a bus, we could go on a field trip. That'd be fun. But we're going to take a field trip over to Psalm 37, I think it is, or 73. We're going to take a little field trip over there next week and look at the same idea as the psalmist. He gets upset that it seems like the wicked people are just getting by with everything, and they're living peaceable, good lives, but by the end of the chapter, he's come to the realization that no, their lives really aren't that great, actually. There's not much peace in their lives. And God is certainly going to reap vengeance upon them. And so that brings us up through here. We haven't made it quite all the way to verse number 19, but I finish with this idea that the Lord loves his children of Israel, and he will continue to.